is extending on our linear functions and linear equations chapter. Today we're going to review how to write linear equations. So if we look at this skier and the path that he's taking on our coordinate plane, we remember the idea of what our y-intercept and our slope actually mean. So if I look really quickly at the idea of his y-intercept. So the y-intercept is where he's crossing the y-axis. So if I make a quick origin so that you can see right here, we can see that our skier 1, 2, 3, or his path is actually passing through the y-intercept of -3. All right, his slope with using rise over run means that we're going to rise 2 and we're going to run 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the slope of his path is a rise of 2 and a run of 5. So from this picture in our coordinate plane, we can see that he crosses the y-axis at -3, having a slope of 2/5. All right, so we've established that he crosses at -3. We've established that his slope is positive 2/5. Now what do we do with this? So according to our slope-intercept form that we learned in Algebra 1, slope-intercept form is in the equation y equals mx plus b, where m represents the slope, our rise over our run, and our b represents our y-intercept. So if I take those two ideas together and we go back to our skier and I place our slope of 2/5 in for m, or use substitution, our equation gets built like this. Y equals 2/5 x minus 3. This showing us our y-intercept and this showing us our slope. Okay? Now, we also have learned in Algebra 1 a form called point-slope form. Now, you use these two different equations differently. This one we're going to use if we are given the slope of the line and if we're given not the y-intercept, but we're given any other point on the line. When we get that other point, that replaces this x sub 1 and that replaces the y sub 1. So make sure you get this formula written down into your notebook. Y minus y sub 1, the y value of the y point, is equal to our slope times x minus x sub 1. Usually once you get all of the values substituted in there, then we'll solve that equation for y and put it back into slope-intercept form. All right, now let's use this. So I'm asking you to write an equation in slope-intercept form for the line that is given a slope and passes through a specific point. So I don't have the y-intercept and I don't have a graph to be able to see it. So therefore, I'm going to utilize my point-slope formula. So I'm going to mark down my point-slope formula. I'm going to replace my slope with -3/5, or substitute it in there. And I'm going to replace the x value with my x sub 1 and the y value with my y sub 1 in the equation. So that's going to give me x minus 5 and y minus a -2. Now when I go to simplify that, that double negative will give me a y plus 2 equals, and I'm going to distribute -3/5 times x. Now when I take -3/5 times a -5, those 5's are going to cancel and leave me with plus 3. Now, like I said, after we're done plugging everything in, we're going to solve for y, so we put our equation into slope-intercept form. So I'm going to subtract 2 from both sides. and that's going to give me an equation where y is equal to negative 3/5 x plus 1. So that makes it very easy for us to graph. We can graph our y-intercept and then use our slope triangles to find our next point. So that is writing the equation in slope-intercept form given a slope and given a point. All right, now, what if they don't give us a slope? So this example says, what is an equation of a line through 2, -3 and -3, 7? So the first thing I'm going to do, since I'm given 2 points, is I'm going to calculate my slope. So we'll remember back to our slope formula is the change in the y's over the change in the x's. So that's going to give me a slope of, so I'm going to start with this point. It doesn't matter where you start, you just have to be cognizant to start at the same place each time. So I'll have -3 minus 7. So I'm going to start with this point on the bottom. So that's going to give me 2 minus -3. I'm going to clean up those double negatives, and that's going to result in a slope of -10 over +5, or a slope of -2. Now, if I'm looking over at my multiple choice questions, I already know that B and C are going to be eliminated. So now I've got to find my y-intercept. So it actually at this point doesn't matter which point you start with. We calculated the slope. Now I'm going to use one of these points to figure out my equation. So I'm going to use that point slope formula again. And everybody can use a different one. Some of you will use this point, some of you will use the second point, and they will both result in the same equation. So I'm going to just start with that first point given. So I'm going to have y minus a -3 is equal to the slope times x minus 2. So there's my x value, there's my y value, and there's my slope. Double negatives again, so I have y plus 3. I'm going to distribute that -2, resulting in -2x plus 4. And then I'm going to go ahead and solve for y. That's going to give me y equals -2x plus 1. So that means D is my correct answer. There's my equation in slope-intercept form given these 2 points. All right, moving along. So our next example is talking about a salesperson getting paid not only a salary, but a commission as well. So a commission is when you earn a portion of your sales. So if you work at American Eagle and you make a 10% sales commission or a 15% sales commission, that means they're going to add up all of the sales that you make for that day and process either 10% or 15% of that amount, and that becomes the portion of your sales. So she's going to make a daily salary. That's going to be whatever when she walks in the door, she gets paid, and then she gets a commission. Now, here's what her commission rate is. It says when her sales are $100, she makes $58. When her sales are $300, she makes $78. So I'm going to say that her X are what her sales are, and we're going to say that Y becomes her salary, what she makes. All right, so I'm going to set up 2 ordered pairs. When her sales are $100, she makes $58. When her sales are $300, she makes $78. So from there, we're going to find the slope. So we're going to take y sub 2 minus y sub 1 and divide that by x sub 2 minus x sub 1. So the slope is going to be calculated at 20 divided by 200, or it's actually 1/10. Now 1/10 mathematically, if I put that into percent form, means that she is making 10% as her commission. 10% of sales is her commission. All right, so what are Miss Stock's daily salary and her commission rate? So her commission rate is 10%. So what we need to do is now find the equation to figure out what her salary is going to be. So, whoops, jumped ahead a little bit. So I'm going to use one of those ordered pairs again. So you'll remember I had 158 and 378. I'm going to use the 100 number. I'm going to use my point slope formula. Y minus 58 is equal to 1/10 of x minus 100. And I'll have to solve for y. So y minus 58, I'm going to distribute the 1/10. And now I'm going to solve for y. All right, this is going to say that her total salary, her total salary is 1/10 of her sales plus $48. So $48 is going to be added each time regardless of what her sales are. So that means that her daily salary is equal to $48. All right, so we have her commission rate and we have her salary. Now they're going to ask us, how much would Jean make in a day if her sales were $500? So now I know that X represents my sales, or Jean's sales. So I'm going to plug that $500 in for her sales and calculate how much she would make. So her total salary is 1/10 of 500, which is 50, plus 48 gives her, whoops, that's a bad math there, gives us $98 as her salary for that day, plus commission. Okay, now, since we're talking about slope and understanding slope, you'll remember in geometry, you learned about parallel lines and perpendicular lines. Now, on the coordinate plane, we should understand that parallel lines never intersect. Now, the only way that they're never going to intersect is if they have the exact same slope. So, parallel lines, you want to write this in your notes, is going to always have the exact same slope. Now, what you also need to understand is that they'll always have a different y-intercept, because if their y-intercepts are the same, then they would fall on the same line. So parallel lines equals the same slope. Now, perpendicular lines. Now notice these two lines. Notice this one has a negative slope. This one has a positive slope. That's how that's going to work with perpendicular lines. So in words it says, in a plane, two oblique lines are perpendicular if and only if the product of their slopes is -1. So that means that I could also reciprocate those. So if I'd multiply them together, they're going to give me a -1. To end up getting 1, I'm going to have to reciprocate my values. So a quick review of that. So if I have a slope of 3, that means the perpendicular slope would have to be -1/3. Because if I take 3 times -1/3, that results in a -1. And that's the rules for perpendicular lines. Now, the only time that rule is going to have an exception is if the lines are vertical and horizontal. In that case, the vertical line is not going to have a slope, and the horizontal line will have a 0 slope. So with a no slope, you can't multiply out to be -1. That's the only exception. Okay, so let's look at these two lines, and I just want to prove that to you. So I'm going to look at and call this line A, and I'm going to call this line B. And if I calculate the slope of line A, excuse me, and if I calculate my rise over run, I see that it rises a -4 and it runs a 1. Excuse me. So my slope of line A is going to equal -4. Here's line B. So if I calculate from here to here, the slope of B is going to be rise of 1 and run of 4. So you can see that these two slopes are indeed opposite reciprocals, making lines A and B be perpendicular, or creating that 90-degree in between. So that takes us to our last example today. So it wants us to write an equation for the line that passes through 3, -2, and is perpendicular to the line whose equation is y equals -5x plus 1. Now, the only thing I need out of this line is its slope. So if the original slope is -5, that means that the perpendicular slope has to be the opposite reciprocal, which is 1/5. Now I'm going to build my equation based off of this point and this slope. Using my point slope formula, I'm going to have y minus a -2 equals my slope times x minus 3. So when I do my calculations, I have y plus 2 equals 1/5 x minus 3/5. And I'm going to go ahead and subtract 2. So I'm going to have to find my common denominators so I can combine those. So I'm going to put a 1 here. That's going to give me -3/5. And I'm going, whoops, I got to find my common denominator, don't I? So my common denominator would be, 5, yeah. I'm not paying attention there. So it's -3/5. And I need to make this be a 5. So I'm going to make that 2 times 5 be 10. All right, and that's going to give me y equals -1/5 x minus 13/5. So you can see these two lines automatically are perpendicular because of their slopes being opposite reciprocals. Now, if I change that question slightly and ask for you to find me parallel lines, the only thing that I would do differently is I would keep the slope -5 and I would not take the opposite reciprocal. So you're going to have a few of those problems as well. That concludes our lesson on writing linear equations.